plus you have to consider the fact that at its very inception, cryptocurrency was designed to ensure anonymity
Right.
and have an opaque process.
We're trying to repurpose something that was built for crime.
Pretty much.
Welcome to the ERM Advantage podcast. I'm Eric Holmquist. Today, I'm very excited to have one of my most respected colleagues in studio. Rob Marro is a deep expert in areas of financial crime, an area that only continues to become more and more complex, every year. So today, I'm looking forward to a conversation about what's evolving, and the whole financial crime area. So welcome.
Thanks, Eric. It's a pleasure to be here.
So just by way of quick background, Rob's early career was spent within the federal agencies, and I'm going to ask him to talk a little bit about that. And then spent quite a few years advising clients around financial crime, BSA, AML, fraud, all of that. And so, again, he's kind of my go-to expert when it comes to an area that is tricky. So we're going to kind of talk about that. So, why don't we start in the obvious place and to the extent possible, because I know there's things that if you told me, you'd have to kill me, and that would be really awkward for the viewing audience.
Yes.
So, just give us a little background of some of your time at the agency and what that was like.
Sure. Well, I started out for the first about year and a half at the agency as a Warsaw Pact ground forces military analyst. And from there, I transitioned into the part of the agency called the Directorate of Operations. Technically, it's the National Clandestine Service. What you think of or people think of commonly as the spies on the street. And I was involved with recruitment operations for about 12 and a half, 13 years for the CIA. And my expertise was concentrated. They have what's called centers of excellence, much the same way that we do in the private sector. And I dabbled in the counterterrorism center of excellence, as well as the weapons of mass destruction area, specifically nuclear and biological.
And I'm kind of curious, and again, I appreciate that there's only certain things you can talk about, but maybe just give us a little color. I mean, obviously, so much has changed in the last 10 years about what it was like, kind of working in the agency, and then maybe how you saw that shift a bit, during prior administration, and kind of what you see happening today.
One of the main factors in the shift from when I was working there to what people routinely see now is that there is a level of openness in the media on the part of the national intelligence organizations that would have been unthinkable back during the 1980s and 1990s. It just would not be spoken about. And they are things that you can now just look up on Google, or you can ask ChatGPT, and it will give you an exhaustive breakdown of everything I wasn't supposed to talk about.
Well, and, again, do you see, there seems to be some effort around improving transparency and,
Yes.
Publishing more. There's less that is, and I guess it's always a fine line between, what needs to be confidential, what needs to be secret and what doesn't. My sense is that we tend to err on the side of caution and classify perhaps more than is necessary. I know some stuff I've seen declassified. I thought, really? You classified that? But is there a right balance about, what gets classified versus transparency?
I think in terms of transparency, what the intelligence agencies, and specifically my former employer, the CIA, would say is that no matter what you're revealing, the paramount concern is that you do not compromise the sources of your intelligence collection and the methods, how you collect it. Sources and methods is still the bedrock principle from which everything grows.
And that makes sense. That makes sense. And look, if we're going to talk about, maybe we're only going to go briefly down kind of this sort of political vein, but I think in all fairness, a lot has changed. People want to believe that there are definitely adults in the room, keeping their eye on all this stuff, because it's been said If you only knew what they know, you probably wouldn't sleep at night. And so I think ignorance can be bliss in many ways. But again, in all fairness, I think there's been a lot of talk around how the government had been weaponized in different ways, which is obviously disconcerting. I mean, in a perfect world, we'd like our agencies to be truly unbiased. But look, people are people. Mm-hmm. And I think, people would take different views on whether or not they had been weaponized. Would you say that they had kind of gone in that direction? And if so, are we trying to get back to a middle, or have we just swung back to the other side doing the same thing?
I don't think it's the latter. I think strides have been made towards more transparency and less weaponization.
Yeah.
The problem is that one man's weaponization is another man's justified intelligence collection. What I found, though, compelling was the recent revelations by the Director of National Intelligence, Ms. Gabbard, that there were clear fact-based evidence that the intelligence collection process and the organizations themselves had been weaponized against current President Trump to a strong degree. It's one thing to make allegations. It's a completely different thing to say, well, here are the receipts and here's what we can prove.
Yeah. And like I said, time will tell. And I kind of get the impression that, we'll learn more as we go. I mean, certainly, Cash and Bongino make a lot of noise and overtures if there's more to come. And at times it seemed like, in Cash interviews was just trying to jump out of his skin. God, I wish I could just tell you what I know, and that's fine. I think in the end, I think that people have a preference for truth and transparency. We might not like it. And that kind of then sort of segues to what I think is one of the most awkward topics right now is this whole Epstein mess.
I knew you were going there.
Because, truth, transparency, yeah, that's a good idea until you actually, turn over that rock and see what crawls out.
Well, speaking on behalf of some of my former colleagues, I can say with absolutely almost 100% certainty, you, Eric, are not in the Epstein files.
Thank God for that. I got that going for me. And, this one, I'm torn. I'm truly torn because I'd really like to see justice for victims, but it seems like to do that, we have to open up a huge can of worms that involves some big, powerful people.
Yes.
Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't, but I think the way this presents to me is, be careful what you wish for. So is there a scenario where we could actually get to some truth and really see justice, where it should happen? Or is this just, once you open that book, you can't close it again and bad things are going to happen?
I think it's the latter.
Yeah.
Only because I think that it's the old saw about closing the barn doors after the horses are gone.
Yeah.
There is just so much of what we don't know. But what we do know is that he was a malicious actor.
Yeah.
He was a criminal, but he ran in very, very elite social and political circles.
Yeah.
And there are people who would obviously suffer, rightly or wrongly, suffer grievous reputational harm if the information came out in an irresponsible manner. If it was just dumped and said, here you go, folks. It's kind of like, Edward Snowden with the WikiLeaks.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think you want that because you're going to hurt people. I think you're going to hurt innocent people.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I think to the extent that prominent people are mentioned in those files as being culpable in an irrefutably provable sense, that's something that is the hallmark or the purview of the FBI.
Yeah. And is there again, this is I'm completely ignorant on, but is there a way that you could selectively produce information such that you could, again, pursue, indictment against people who are truly culpable, again, without really opening up the full Pandora's box?
I think what they'll have to do is they will have to let the investigative process and the law enforcement process continue down its natural path. And then at some point, they will have to turn over the rock. Some of the bugs will have fled by that time, Others will be dead to rights because there's no way to avoid it. But it's going to be a byproduct of the investigative process.
Yeah. Well, as with, so much right now is a whole lot of we'll see.
Exactly. Plus there's the benchmark of our jurisprudence system, which says innocent until proven guilty.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not innocent until allegations are made.
Yeah. Well, and again, this is all tricky. I think we have the same conversation 6 months from now, a year from now. Things can be different. Certainly there should be more information. And I think a lot is in discovery. And so, it is still early innings. But I think it's going to be interesting to see, again, which way the winds blow. Let's step back and kind of look at, again, trying to sort of look forward and again, sort of framing within what is sort of the center of this is this whole thing of financial crime. And, again, I really admire, people like you that really understand this space, because I pride myself and know a lot about risk management, but I know enough to be dangerous around financial crime. I just know that it's a space that it's a fight you can't really win. You can only fight well.
Exactly.
It's not unlike people in information security that you can't win this battle. All you can do is just fight it well. The challenge is that, we're in a place in time. I mean, it was different when the biggest threat was somebody stole your check in the mail. Mm-hmm. We could deal with that. But obviously the way things are evolving, with technology involvement, it's just getting faster and faster and bigger in scope. So let's start with kind of the administration. We've got obviously your intelligence agencies. We think about, FBI, the Fed, Secret Service, they play a central role in a lot of these oversight and investigation and monitoring and all of that. Are they equipped to be able to handle the next generation of financial crime as these tools evolve, or are they working on that? What's your sense of where we are?
I think the most honest answer I can give you is it's in progress, almost the way it is with a lot of the private sector financial institutions and non-bank financial institutions, only because with the advent of AI, and I realize that that's a very popular buzzword right now, but it's a reality we've had kind of thrust upon us. And a lot of people, myself included, are finding that AI has necessitated learning the fine art of sipping from a fire hose.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're gonna unpack the whole discussion around financial crime and trends and all that, because a lot to talk about there. But one thing I am kind of curious is I know, having spent many years in around banking, I mean, banks filed a mountain of SARS, suspicious activity reports, around whenever suspicious activity, and they're required to file these, and they file them to FinCEN, and it is a mountain of these, these SARS, and in theory, these are analyzed and actions taken, but in practice, I mean, do they really use this information, and what comes from all that information that it gets submitted to the Fed? Actually,
yes, FinCEN does do a great job.
Treasury, excuse me, not Fed. I take that back. Yeah.
FinCEN does do a great job, because you're right. They get thousands upon thousands of suspicious activity reports. And one of the problems that they've had to deal with in the past, it's been a challenge for them, has been the fact that banks will file preemptive SARs.
Yeah.
Are we sure that we have a problem here? Well, perhaps not in a provable sense, but let's file a SAR and cover ourselves.
Yeah.
And then it's up to the people down at FinCEN to say, all right, this is actionable, or all right, it goes into box B.
Yeah. But your sense is they're analyzing these, I guess, looking for patterns?
Exactly. Patterns that involve multiple financial institutions, especially, plus foreign actors.
And how do they typically act on this when they discover, hey, we're starting to see some recurring things here? What do they do with that information?
They'll perform an investigation, and if criminality is proved or culpability, all right, whether it's direct involvement or due to laxity in controls in a compliance program, It all depends. They could turn around and turn it over to the FBI and say, for example, here's this virtual asset service provider. We know that they are supposed to have a compliance program around money laundering prevention, but our records indicate, based on reporting from third-party financial institutions, they don't have a compliance program.
Yeah.
It's honored. Sometimes it's honored more in the breach than the observance, especially, the brave new world of the digital currency space.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's a whole topic we could spend an afternoon on. And I have a real fascination with this.
You promised to buy me lunch. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I am cautiously optimistic that the idea of a digital currency can have value. And I just lost half the audience because there's all of my true dyed-in-the-wool, financial folks are like, oh, you're an idiot. Okay, I've been called worse. I think here's my take on what I think is reality, and please call me out. I think the reality is that we will be a digital world. We will have some kind of digital payments. Bitcoin has been the prototype. It's not really sustainable long term, but the concept of a blockchain ain't going away. I think we figured out that there's some merit to this. The idea of coins, we'll see. I think the way the way that the Congress is approaching this is approving the idea of a stable coin, so that at least you've got it tethered to a currency. Is the least worst way to explore this. Mm-hmm. Then I think the idea of exploring, crypto makes sense. But again, I don't know if I see that. And I believe that a CBDC should never happen, a central bank digital currency, not for the least of which is, could our government really create an infrastructure capable of securing, a fiat digital currency, putting aside all the risks to the economy and all of that. But all of that to say, I think there is a role of, digital currencies in our financial ecosystem. Okay, there's a whole lot of what that looks like. We don't know. We'll see. I have to see how it goes. But, again, is the government going to be able to adapt to having a digital alongside our traditional fiat currency? And how much of a lift do you think it's going to be for them to be able to have the skill set and the infrastructure and tech stack to be able to manage that in our ecosystem?
I think for the time being, and perhaps for the next half a decade or so, you're going to find that the expertise surrounding those issues is still resident within the private sector, because the private sector drives innovation.
Yeah.
And when the private sector is seeking to build out an entire new industry with a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, it's typically not the federal government that you turn to say, help us make it go better, faster.
Yeah.
So that expertise right now is resident in the private sector. I think the government, the regulatory agencies, the enforcement agencies are going to be playing catch up with the technology. And to some extent, it's always been reactive.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, like I say, again,
but we did get to a point where, say 50 years ago, it was recognized that money laundering was a problem, and eventually the Bank Secrecy Act was implemented. Eventually, OFAC got together and got its act around sanctioned entities, parties, and countries. All right, and then we had the Patriot Act, and you recently just had the BSA updated a couple of years ago again, because they're trying to remain current.
Yeah.
With crypto and virtual currency.
And again, it's a moving target.
Exactly.
But that's a good transition. Again, we're always optimistic that we've got adults in the room managing all this. But I mean, heck, I'm very comfortable around technology, and I couldn't begin to imagine how I would govern, that in our system. So I think the fact that we're taking a fairly measured approach makes a lot of sense. This is definitely, crawl before we walk, before we fly.
Right.
But I also appreciate that I think there's a recognition that this ain't going anywhere. Again, we're going to be a digital society. Just, what does it look like? So that gives us a good transition. I want to talk about the landscape and particularly what it looks like, relative to the consumer world and since this obviously involves, banks, which we've done a lot of work for over the years, what do you see as some of the real notable threats, to institutions, within the kind of the financial crime space?
Are you talking institutions that are primarily geared towards retail interaction or larger institutional organizations?
I think both. I absolutely agree. These are different profiles, but just the general question of, what do you see as the threat landscape, and what's emerging, and what are really some of the bigger threats to these institutions?
Well, I think to paraphrase what Jesus said about the poor you will always have with you, in the financial crime world, the criminals and the problems you will always have with you, they are just going to be an adapting threat.
Yep.
So whether you're a $50 million very small community bank, or you're a multi-billion-dollar financial institution with headquarters on Wall Street or Canary Wharf in London, you're going to be facing some of the same problems.
Yeah.
And it's the fact that where people will get bitten is in being agnostic or hostile to adaptability.
And that's a really good point. And I think
if anyone says they've got the answer and they're dogmatic about it, and they say, I know how to fix this.
Yeah.
Well, you might know about yesterday's problem. I bet you don't have a crystal ball for 2 weeks, 2 months, or 2 years.
Well, like I said, it's a war you really can't win. So if we look at financial crime, so there's a spectrum of, we're talking earlier about, friendly fraud. That's still a thing. People stealing their parents' identity. A lot of the usual, is sort of brute force blocking and tackling. You could rob a bank. You could, kite checks. Again, a lot of that stuff that we've lived with for decades, and that's
still out there.
Still out there. It's not going away.
It's that the family of crime is getting bigger.
And now we add on top of that everything that is technology enabled. So if we start with kind of the traditional blocking, tackling stuff, friendly fraud and check fraud and all that, I think, as you said, not going anywhere.
Right.
So that's always going to be here. But I think banks are pretty good at that.
Yes.
I think they built because that's
the legacy, what I call institutional memory that the banks have.
So that I think we can put that and say, we pretty well know how to deal with that. And as I look at just stats across the industry, I don't really see this huge spike in this. There's routine fraud. You're always going to have credit card fraud, and it's just a part of the cost of doing business. So I think the focus is more on the tech edge of all of this.
Yes.
Let's put AI aside for a second, because that's its own animal. But clearly, as technology continues to evolve, technology capabilities, it seems like it's just a constant ratcheting of new attack methods, all that. So is that a fair statement that it's always going to get more complex, always faster? What are the bad guys doing to continually evolve their ability to commit fraud?
A lot of it is going to try to be playing catch up to what the bad guys are doing, because criminals, in certain ways, they're very stupid, but they're also very clever.
Yeah.
All right. We've seen an increase in what I would call highly sophisticated technology-driven threats in the fraud area. For example, there's a concept that was unknown a couple of years ago, and it's called CEO or C-suite fraud. And with the programs that are out there now, people have the ability, just based on pulling snippets of someone's voice off the internet and their image. Let me put forth a hypothetical.
Yeah.
Let me put forth a hypothetical. Say you're the senior operations manager for a bank, and you have robust controls around wire payments. And it's Friday afternoon at 4:30. Everyone's packing up to leave. And you get a call from the CEO of the bank saying there's a payment in queue, and normally you would have to wait a day or two to let the controls take effect around it.
Right.
Before you, but look, this payment needs to be released in the next 25 minutes, or I will have your head.
And we've seen this historically, like the email. But at this point, people have become conditioned. If I get an email from the CEO and I'm in the Bahamas, you know it's fake.
Exactly.
But now that I could fake a voice really convincingly.
Yeah. Or not just a voice. What if it's a Zoom call, but you don't realize it's a third-party threat actor who's impersonating the CEO, but to all intents and purposes, you can't tell the difference. Yeah. Are you going to defy the CEO?
Yeah. And again, this goes to the whole, introducing AI into the mix, which brings a lot of capabilities, a lot of new things we can do with it. But it just makes a big mess of this because now we've got really, really sophisticated tools to be able to impersonate. So
as an example of that, you saw what happened in the news a couple of days ago with Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota.
No, I didn't.
This is actually kind of funny. Are you aware of the whole controversy that part of society has thrown around the Sydney Sweeney jeans?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Well, someone took an AI program and they harvested video and audio clips of Senator Amy Klobuchar.
Great.
And they posted it on the internet of her, what looked very much like her, giving a speech. And I'm only saying what the AI said. It was a deep fake AI.
Yeah.
But Senator Amy Klobuchar, her fake version online said, let's face it, on our side of the aisle, we have people that are just too ugly to go outside.
Yeah. And
it received 1 million hits before she could get ahead of it. So it's reactive.
Yeah. And some people could look at that and go, okay, I'm going to look at, I know that's fake, but there's going to be a certain percentage that don't. And so this is the problem. So I think we both agree this is a big deal. Okay.
Yes.
This is a huge issue. So let's try and be practical here.
It's nothing to panic over, though. You can address it in a measured, calm way.
Yeah. So let's talk about, just, again, some thoughts around, again, you've advised many institutions on how to approach a financial crime program, to, again, make best efforts to combat this. Some of it in the end, you may just have to write the check, but, maybe just give a few thoughts on some things that the banks can do that, particularly contemplating some of these more advanced methods.
I would say the best thing that a bank could do is, if it has the leadership with the mindset of being proactive, is to form, instead of separate cells for addressing fraud, addressing sanctions, addressing money laundering, is to combine them all into a financial crime unit, almost like countries have FIUs.
Yeah, I've really grown to like this idea.
Well, it's where the world is going, because otherwise you could end up throwing obscene amounts of money at segregated problems, not realizing that the channels are all in parallel.
Right.
And you're not achieving your greatest efficiencies there.
Well, and I think anecdotally, and I think I'm not getting out of line here, is we've seen this with our own, federal agencies that, the agency one wasn't talking with agency two, and they missed something that had they been sharing notes. And I get the politics, I get the territories, I get all that. But that aside, I think as risk managers, that we would probably err on the side of coordinating and cooperating with information.
Yes.
And there's so many tangential elements in each of those fields. Now, I know, having, seen some of the alert monitoring systems that are out there, that they similarly are trying to use things like AI, which I think is a really smart application, because in theory, as you're monitoring these mountains of transactions, billions and billions of transactions, I think it's fair to say that technology may be able to spot subtle patterns that a person might not.
Exactly.
But I guess the question is, I think it's fair to say that that's an important way that these tools are going to evolve. The bad guys are working 24/7 to find new ways to attack and steal and all of that. So, are the tools going to be able to keep up? Or are they always going to be one step behind? Did they really still give you a fair fight in fighting some of these advanced methods of fraud?
I think, to be fair, the vendors, to a large degree, are trying to be as proactive as possible. And AI is one of the arrows in their quiver. The problem is when you have to use it in a reactive way, because the criminals are being proactive with it, and oftentimes the money is gone before the relevant either compliance unit or national level regulator has a chance to put their coffee cup down. And I'm not being sarcastic. Sometimes it happens that fast.
Yeah.
And in fact, one of the biggest challenges is with the speed at which technology is advancing and the way financial institutions have historically addressed financial crime and sanctions. Is there going to be a point, are we at there now? Is there going to be a point where technology and the speed of transactions and the velocity, the entire volume of transactions, will that overwhelm financial institutions? And there's no hard and fast answer on that, except to say I can guarantee that I know which ones will fail. And the ones that will fail are the ones that do large-scale batch processing, who say, don't worry about it. We're fairly certain our legacy systems and our legacy organization is right on top of this.
Well, and again, check me, but I think the reality is that institutions are going to have to use technology and AI to have a fight in this, to be able to try to defend some of this. But it's not a silver bullet.
No.
I think that this will always be an honest combination of good technology combined with smart people thinking on their feet. And I've been saying for some time now, I mean, obviously AI, there's a lot of talk around what jobs AI is going to displace. And I don't know, if I was early in my career, I'd say financial crime would still be a terrific field to go into.
Yes.
Because again, you're still going to need smart people on top of all this. AI cannot be an end-all solution. Is that fair?
Yes, because think in terms of a Venn diagram, two circles that overlap. One circle is technologists, and the other circle is financial crime and sanctions subject matter experts. They are coming to overlap.
Yeah.
And in the future, the very near future, if you do not have technologists who are embedded within your financial intelligence unit or financial crime unit, if you don't have technologists embedded there, what's going to happen is the people who don't know what they're looking at, by the time they reach out to the technologists, it'll be far too late. You're going to have a blended organization where the technologists are an organic part of the. You're going to need people who are savvy with computers, code, AI, but who also have a fairly significant background in financial crime and a de minimis to be able to say, I think this is a problem. Let me go talk to someone else in the financial crime unit who knows it from a regulatory and investigative perspective better than I do.
Because I mean,
and it goes both ways.
Is it a fair statement that, again, you cannot defend against every attack? You can't. So a lot of it comes down to how quickly can you identify something ain't right, and how quickly can you respond. And I've said this for years in the world of info security. If you find out you've had a breach, time is not on your side.
Exactly.
You don't have days, you don't have hours, you have minutes to have a response. And, case in point, I mean, after you've had a breach is not the time to figure out how to write the correspondence to your customers. You should have already had that drafted.
That's right.
So it's ready to go. And same thing, I think, is this an area where banks need to have almost role-played some of these scenarios? So if something happens, you got a strike team that can move.
Exactly. The concept of a flying squad comes to mind.
Yeah.
People who are targeted and experts in specific areas. You're not going to have your working level journeyman AML officer who's going to be an expert in every area. The only way they can be an expert in every area is if they do not do their job and they just sit in front of textbook and computers all day.
Yeah. And I know, again, as we think about, and I've talked with some banks that are maybe traditional banking, but they want to maybe go into some deeper waters. And in part, it's kind of a survival move. I mean, the environment is very competitive, and if all you offer is checking and savings and mortgages, you have the same commodity that 100 other banks offer.
Right.
So, again, as we see technology evolving, it's going to lead to new products maybe. But it also could mean, going into products that create more risk, maybe have more BSA issues or something like that. And should a bank necessarily hesitate to explore these areas for fear of, this is going to open up more, financial crime, or just manage it well?
No, manage it. I think the phrase is manage it well. Anticipate through leveraging the knowledge of your experts in your financial crime unit so that you can anticipate. And the other thing is that when your regulators come visiting, don't just tell them what a great compliance program you have. It's becoming increasingly important from a nuts and bolts perspective to demonstrate it. Show me, don't tell me.
Yeah. And let's just touch on briefly, come back to the whole digital currency thing. So again, the scenario as I see it is, the Fed sort of cooperating with the idea of a digital rail, some kind of a blockchain, rail, for the purpose of being able to facilitate transactions based on probably a stable coin, again, one that is tethered to a currency, memorializing other types of transactions, which I think is a really, really good use case. And so, trying to sort of limit the risk. Now, that's a dramatic oversimplification of what it's going to look like. But again, give me some room here. Recognizing there's no more unknowns than knowns at this point. Just give me your perspective on, again, we go forward a couple of years and we're now living with a digital currency in some way. What does that do to the banking industry? What does that do to the financial crime world? And any insights as to new threats that could create and new, defenses banks are going to have to consider?
No, fair point. I would say the question ultimately boils down to, are you talking about something like a government-backed central bank digital currency?
No. This is just purely
or something like a stable coin.
A stable coin only. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's a different.
Your risks are higher there.
It's a different payment rail, as opposed to the Fed, where everything is controlled. So, like I said, I'm less concerned about the coin, but just working with having this other payment mechanism, in our ecosystem.
I would say it all depends. You have to take an institution by institution approach, because some institutions will have things like correspondent banking, others won't. The ones that have the correspondent banking and they're introducing things like the use of stable coins, the best thing I could say would be, you would have to look at it at a very bare minimum. Your starting space should be the Wolfsburg correspondent banking due diligence questionnaire, because that has been updated recently. And as government documents or transnational documents go, they're fairly up to date.
Yeah, that's good to know. Because one of the things that intrigues me about digital currencies, and one thing that to me is an advantageous element, actually, is the fraud element. So in a traditional banking transaction, the payment goes through the Fed and there's a clearing process, and we've incorporated methods that can sit on top of that can create the impression of real time. It's not real time. It's stuff that's just being memo posted and then it clears overnight. So it's still the same old clunky infrastructure. We've just kind of put a prettier face on it to facilitate real time. But we're talking digital, it's real time.
Yes.
So the advantage of something that is recorded to a blockchain is once it's recorded, as I understand it, within like 10 minutes, it's immutable. It cannot be changed.
Correct.
So assuming that you are who you say you are, you've eliminated a lot of the fraud aspect, because again, that transaction cannot be changed. So if we learn to live with a blockchain element in our system, is that a good thing in terms of being able to mitigate fraud?
Provided you have the proper controls around.
Yeah, that's always the caveat.
Well, one example I would bring out is everyone's familiar with KYC, know your customer.
Right.
They're also familiar with KYB, know your business. But in the era of something that you just made reference to, the veritable speed of the transactions, where a button is pushed and it doesn't take time to clear anymore. 15 minutes later, it shows up on the other end. I recently saw that in real time with my credit union saying they were going to send a quite sizable amount of money to my bank in New Jersey. And in years past, it would have been, well, we're going to initiate the payment today. Today's Tuesday. Maybe Thursday afternoon or Friday morning, it'll be there. When they did it, 20 minutes later, all the funds were available for me to immediately withdraw.
Right.
So one of the tools that banks are going to have to use when you're talking about that kind of transaction velocity is they're going to have to set up tools surrounding KYT, know your transactions. And you're going to have to become very familiar with how customers transact their business in terms of transaction amount and velocity.
Yeah.
And you're going to be looking for anomalous transactions that are then going to set off alarm bells somewhere so that at least it's looked at, and maybe looked at before someone hits the send button.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously they do to some extent do some of that today, but this I think is one of the challenging factors and why crypto has not been able to adopt it is the opaqueness of the transaction, and that whole know your customer on top of knowing the transaction. It seems to me that this means there's going to be a ratcheting up of not just knowing your customer, but the analytics that you've got. That you've got things that are going to put up red flags if things just don't look right.
Exactly.
It's only going to get more and more.
Plus, you have to consider the fact that at its very inception, cryptocurrency was designed to ensure anonymity
Right.
and have an opaque process.
We're trying to repurpose something that was built for crime.
Pretty much. It's a criminal's dream in certain ways.
Well, this is why I've told people before, because they tend to take a position of all or nothing on the whole idea of crypto. And I said, well, the problem is you have to separate like the coin from the technology. Mm-hmm. The coin is just kind of silly. Again, I mean, all crypto has no value technically. Right now, it's an intrigue, but it certainly has some possibilities around a method of transfer. But we cannot discount the technology. What was shown within the blockchain was the ability that you could have a real-time transaction that is immutable. But again, it's kind of a good news, bad news.
Exactly.
Stepping away from the crypto for a second because my head hurts. Because again, I think there's more known than unknown. And I just for reference, I'm actually going to be doing a whole video around crypto and Bitcoin and all of that, because I want to do a deep dive on the mechanics of it, and we'll get to that. But just stepping back to just the basic fraud scheme again, when you look at the really big incidents that have happened, does that typically involve the combination of an outside actor and an insider they worked with, or is it just worse if there's an insider involved?
It's the second instance you said.
Okay.
The vast majority of the large-scale frauds take place with third-party outsiders. However, when you have an insider who is able to craft the situation such that the fraud may not be discovered for quite a while, not only do you have the possibility of losing millions upon millions of dollars, but the fact that you have an insider that may know very well how to cover their tracks.
Yeah.
It's a problem. But insider fraud is much, much less in terms of occurrence. It's just the consequences can be more severe because they're a trusted entity.
Yeah, and I've said for years, look, trust but verify, and having some ability to be, virtually watching over people's shoulders, I think has some merit because, again, it's always the quiet ones.
Exactly.
So, all right, we're going to take a quick break for a short commercial message. And when we come back, we're going to turn the corner on a different topic. That's a lot of fun. We'll be right back.
One of the most important questions you can ask about your enterprise risk management program is it helping you make better business decisions? Or is it simply taking up a lot of people's time without creating any value? Is it helping you gain a better understanding of your business? Or merely documenting what you already know? The tools and resources available from ERM Advantage are built specifically to help any organization get the most out of their risk management programs. We have the largest library of free content covering proven best practices in enterprise and operational risk management. We have developed industry-leading tools and templates for every aspect of the program, including risk appetite, risk assessments, risk monitoring and reporting, and so much more. All available at a fraction of the cost of developing these tools from scratch. We are ready to assist you with program development or enhancements, board or leadership training, or reviews of existing programs. Contact us today to see what best-of-breed risk management can look like in your organization.
All right, welcome back. We're talking with Rob Marro, a longtime colleague of mine and friend, and we've been talking about financial crime. So we're gonna turn a corner now into a different direction. In addition to Rob's formidable experience around financial crime, he is also a published author. And I wanted to make sure we talked a little bit about some of the work he's been doing. He had previously had a screenplay he wrote that was produced into a movie. Mm-hmm. Last year published a sequel to the Christmas story to Ebenezer Scrooge and the Ghost of Christmas Love. This is a continuation of the story we all know and love, and I loved it. This was terrific.
Thank you.
And it built very on the whole character and the timeline in a really interesting way. So I wanted to talk a bit about some of the work that you've published, and then you've got some stuff in the works right now coming up. So let's chat about that.
Okay. Well, it started with Ebenezer Scrooge. I had ideas for other books, but my wife and I were watching the 1951 movie with Sir Alistair Sim, the old black and white movie that you don't let children under 8 years old watch.
Right.
Because they all have nightmares. But my wife looked very thoughtful when the movie ended, and she said, I don't buy his whole redemption story. And I said, why not? She said, well, do you remember the scene when he was with the Ghost of Christmas Present, where he goes to a Victorian homeless shelter and he sees Alice, his former fiancée? In that telling of the story, she was a spinster, and she spent Christmas Eve helping people in a homeless shelter, the poor and indigent. And Ebenezer Scrooge calls out to her, but she can't hear him, and then he angrily asks the Ghost of Christmas Present, are these people even real? And the ghost says, yes, Ebenezer, the people are real. We are the shadows here. But it's obvious from the look on his face that he was once again smitten at seeing his former fiancée again. It stirred something within him, but they kind of let that end dangle. The movie ends the way they all end, with God bless us everyone. But my wife looked at me, she said, I don't buy his change of heart as long as he doesn't go back, and if not, at least win Alice's affection back, which would be a stretch, but just sincerely apologize. But they don't even show that. Maybe it's assumed. Maybe they think people aren't going to think that far ahead. But she said, until I see that, I'm not buying it. And then she kind of pointed at me. She said, there's your book.
Now, did you ever have any impression that Lewis Carroll maybe considered a sequel, or it was just one and done from him?
I think it was one and done.
Yeah.
I think the whole point was to show morality, a morality play, as well as social justice in Victorian pre-industrial revolutionary England.
Yeah.
That's what I think he meant to do. And I think in that he succeeded. It resonates with people because the topics surrounding it are timeless. That's why, to date, there's been, as far as treatments and adaptations of A Christmas Carol, there's been well over 135 different ones.
No kidding.
Yes.
I had no idea.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely. Because I had to do my due diligence. Did anyone ever write a book going down this lane?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I really enjoyed how you not only did you continue the plot line, but introduce some new elements, but also some historical connections. Because I know you studied a lot of history, and so you really wove in some very interesting, historical elements consistent with the timeline. Let's talk about the stuff that you've kind of got in the works right now, because there's a lot of neat stuff.
Sure. Post Hill Press is going to publish, and Simon & Schuster is going to distribute my next book, which is a nonfiction effort. And it's a story about one of the most controversial Vatican insiders who ever existed. His name was the Reverend Dr. Malachi Martin, and the book is entitled Malachi Martin in the Shadows of the Vatican. He was a fascinating person because he's most often associated with the topic of exorcism and possession because he had a bestseller in the late 70s entitled Hostage to the Devil. But I was friends with the man for over 10 years, and there were just so many different facets of his life. He wasn't just a polyglot, he was a polymath. He was a Jesuit. He was absolutely brilliant. I start the book off in his village in Ireland and then transition to the fact that as an Irish Boy Scout, he actually met both Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini in the mid-1930s while he was a teenager. He then went into the Jesuits because of his facility with languages, ancient Semitic languages in particular, writings from approximately the time of the patriarch Abraham. He was one of the initial team to help decipher the Dead Sea Scrolls. He was also an intelligence operative for the Vatican behind the Iron Curtain during the 1950s to help minister to the Catholic Church behind the Iron Curtain. There was ruthless persecution. I found out he was also an avid fencer.
No kidding.
In terms of the sport. Yes. He was almost Olympic level
Wow.
in terms of his facility there. And then he became the religion editor for William F. Buckley's National Review and subsequently became a best-selling author through a couple of Guggenheim fellowships. There's a phrase that Winston Churchill said in his 1935 eulogy to T.E. Lawrence, the famous Lawrence of Arabia. He ended it with, "We shall not see his like pass this way again." And that's what I wanted to memorialize about my friend, Father Martin. For me, he was a combination spiritual director, best friend, and grandfather rolled up into one. I know for a lot of people, they tend to concentrate on this or that facet of his life, but I just wanted to give a holistic picture of sometimes a very misunderstood priest of the church. So that's coming out in December. And then following that, I've already kind of promised that there will be a sequel to Ebenezer Scrooge and the Ghost of Christmas Love. Its working title right now is Lavinia.
Okay.
The book I'm working on right now is a reimagining of the wise men, the magi who came to visit Christ. And all I'm going to say is that in the Gospel of Matthew, all it says is that wise men from the east came inquiring where they could find the newborn king of the Jews. And it says, and at hearing that, Herod was greatly afraid, and with him all of Jerusalem. Being a major caravan trading point in the ancient Middle East, some people showing up on mules and camels, making that, why would that cause great fear among the population? And people have said, well, so where do you build out from that? And I say the elevator pitch is, the book is, think Tom Clancy meets Parappa-Pum-Pum.
Well, and I know we talked about this previously a little bit, and I was fascinated by, the information because, again, 99.9% of people, all we know is the Christmas stories, and we envision this as three guys who showed up out of nowhere when it looked nothing like that. This was not three guys showing up. This was an army of people showing up.
Exactly.
So I to your point, there's a whole dynamic here, cultural, political, dynamic. And I think, wow, why have we not ever understood this full story? Because it really is a much richer story than
exactly.
three guys on a greeting card.
Exactly.
So
exactly. Most people don't realize that 2,000 years ago, if you want to draw a parallel to a current day paradigm or a fairly recent one, the relationship between the United States and the Soviet Union back during the Cold War was superpower confrontation. Many people don't realize that at the time of Christ, there was also superpower confrontation. It was the Roman Empire versus the empire directly to the east of Rome, the Parthian Empire, headquartered in current day Iran and Iraq, but stretching almost from the Han Chinese Empire near the Himalaya Mountains all the way up to current day, close to but not up to Damascus, Syria.
Okay. Well, there's no question that given that all the stuff we have going in financial crime, we're going to have you as a recurring guest. Because again, I think
You just want another book.
6 months, 6 months from now, everything could look different. And so all the research you do for these just gives us unlimited material to talk about. So again, Ebenezer Scrooge and the Ghost of Christmas Love, absolutely fantastic read. I blew through it. This is available on Amazon as well as at Barnes & Noble. So Rob, thank you again. This has been wonderful. You're just, again, a wealth of knowledge, and I really appreciate being able to learn from you and hear from you, and just wish you luck with your upcoming publishing.
Thank you, Eric. It's been a pleasure. It's been a lot of fun.
All right. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you in the next episode. Bye-bye.
The ERM Advantage podcast is recorded at Lightshed Studios, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Copyright 2026 ERM Advantage, LLC. All rights reserved. To inquire about appearing on the podcast, please contact us at ermadvantage@gmail.com.